Howard Carter's spectacular discovery in 1922 of the almost intact tomb of the boy pharaoh Tutankhamun, in the Valley of the Kings, inspired an interest in ancient Egypt that endures to this day. Indeed, the fabulous gold mask of Tutankhamun has become the popular image of Egyptian civilization. But these dazzling treasures have put the actual person behind the golden mask in the shade. The real life of the boy king of Egypt was short and somewhat mysterious. His parentage remains uncertain, as does the date of his accession to the throne. Until recently, the cause of Tutankhamun's death was also completely unknown. Was it a hunting accident, or did he die from a disease? Or could he have been murdered? Tutankhamun remains a mystery despite Carter's discovery. The tomb was full of riches, more than 2,000 objects in all, and the mummy of the boy pharaoh was found contained within 3 golden coffins. But there was practically no documentation recovered from within the tomb, which makes it very difficult to put together an accurate story of Tutankhamun's life. It is believed that his parents may have been the heretic 18th dynasty pharaoh Akhenaten, who ruled Egypt from 1367 BC to 1350 BC, and his mysterious second wife, Kia. Akhenaten had taken the unprecedented and revolutionary step of replacing the traditional old gods of Egypt with a single sun god called the Aten. Thus, Tutankhamun's name at birth was actually Tutankhaten and was only changed to Tutankhamun a year or 2 into his reign, when polytheism was restored to Egypt. Tutankhamun seems to have come to the throne at the age of 9, perhaps around 1334 BC, and ruled for about 10 years. Because the new pharaoh was so young and had no living female relatives old enough, much of the considerable responsibility of his kingships, and his personal upbringing, must have been in the care of his chief minister, and horemheb, commandeering chief of the army. Shortly after becoming king, Tutankhamun married his half-sister Akhenaten, a daughter of Akhenaten and his first wife, Nefertiti, and granddaughter of the chief advisor to the king. There is very little information about the reign of Tutankhamun, who ruled first from Akhenaten's city of Amarna, on the east bank of the Nile about 250 miles north of Luxor, before moving to his new capital at Memphis, 12 miles south of modern Cairo on the west bank of the Nile. It was Horemheb and who were probably responsible for persuading the new pharaoh to relinquish the religion of Aten, and start to return to the old ways. Preserved on his restoration stele at the Temple of Karnak at Thebes are descriptions of the steps taken by Tutankhamun to bring back the old gods and traditions, which included founding a new priesthood and embarking on building and restoration programs at the temples of the ancient gods. The pharaoh and his wife did have 2 known children, both stillborn girls, whose mummies were discovered in his tomb. The only other fact that is known is that when he was about 19 years old, Tutankhamun's life was mysteriously cut short. Many have viewed it as suspicious that as soon as Tutankhamun was old enough to make his own decisions and take on the role of leader of his people rather than share it with and Horemheb, he was dead. After Tutankhamun's death, his widow Akhenaten married her own grandfather. A signet ring bearing the names of and Akhenaten, and seemingly representing this union, has been found. This marriage enabled who had no royal blood, to inherit the throne. Akhenaten disappears from the record soon after the marriage, suggesting that she was murdered, possibly at the instigation of Shortly after the death of her husband and just before she vanished forever from history, she wrote one of the most startling letters ever recovered from the ancient world. The letter, sent by an Egyptian royal widow, has been dated to the end of the 18th dynasty, and was found in the archives of the Hittite capital of Hadassah. The document had been sent to King Subtitles of the Hittites, an emerging power in the Near East at the time and an obvious danger to Egypt. Part of the document states, "My husband has died and I have no son. They say about you that you have many sons. You might give me one of your sons to become my husband. Never shall I pick out a servant of mine and make him my husband. I am afraid." The Hittite king at first expressed suspicion at the motives of Akhenaten, but after sending a messenger to Egypt to investigate the situation, who brought back a second letter from the Egyptian queen, he agreed to the marriage and sent his son, the Prince Zananzah, to Egypt. However, the prince only got as far as the Egyptian border before he met his death, probably murdered by an Egyptian faction who did not want a foreign king occupying the throne of Egypt. This murder ultimately led to war between the Egyptians and the Hittites, and ended in defeat for Egypt at Amka, near Kadesh in western Syria. Some have suggested that this incredible letter was not written by Akhenaten at all, but by her mother Nefertiti, but this is unlikely as Nefertiti's husband Akhenaten had a successor, thus there would be no need for a letter to a foreign king. So what possible reason could Akhenaten have had for instigating this treasonous correspondence, which effectively amounts to her begging an enemy king to take over her country? Tutankhamun's death, without leaving an heir, may have been at the heart of the problem. One theory is that the letters were written because the Egyptians were wary of the threat posed by the advancing Hittite Empire, and believed that an alliance with the Hittites by marriage would preserve Egypt from conquest. The queen may have planned to rule with a Hittite king supported by the military might of the Hittite Empire, but her plan was thwarted with the murder of Prince Zananzah. This brings us to the fate of Tutankhamun himself. Ever since Tutankhamun's body was first unwrapped and examined by Howard Carter's team in the 1920s, there has been intense speculation as to how and why the king died. X-ray examinations of the skull, first in 1968 by a team from the University of Liverpool, then in 1978 by researchers from the University of Michigan, revealed a shard of bone in the skull and evidence of hemorrhage at the back of the head, possibly caused by a deliberate blow to the skull. The evidence from the X-rays, taken together with the suspicious circumstances surrounding King Tut's death, have prompted many to conclude that the boy pharaoh must have been murdered. But by whom? The person most frequently put forward as being behind Tutankhamun's possible murder is the man who had most to gain by his death, the elderly royal servant I reigned for a little more than 4 years as pharaoh after the demise of Tutankhamun, and would seem to have had motive for murder, though there is at present no evidence that he had anything to do with the death of the king. Other researchers believe a much younger man, horemheb, who succeeded around 1321 BC, to become the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt's 18th dynasty, was responsible. Horemheb reigned for 27 years as pharaoh, during which time he brought about a major reorganization of the country, resulting in a much stronger and more stable Egypt than had been seen for many years. He was also determined to completely return Egypt to its traditional religious beliefs, and he therefore set about obliterating all traces of the Aten cult. It is thought that one reason why Tutankhamun was omitted from the classical king lists of Egypt is that Horemheb usurped most of the boy pharaoh's work, including monuments at Karnak and Luxor. Could either of these two shadowy figures, or perhaps both, have plotted the death of the boy pharaoh remains a mystery. In January 2005, the first CAT scans ever performed on an Egyptian mummy were carried out on the 3,300-old skeleton of Tutankhamun. Surprisingly, the team of Egyptian researchers found no evidence at all of a blow to the back of the boy's head, and no other evidence of violence on the body. The report stated that the fragment of bone identified from previous skull X-rays had probably become dislodged during the embalming process. When Tutankhamun was being mummified, his brain was removed and the skull filled with large amounts of resin, which has hardened over time. If the sliver of bone had been the result of an injury before death, it would not still be loose in the skull. The dark area shown at the back of the skull on earlier X-rays, thought by many to indicate some kind of trauma, was explained by the scientists as the result of the body being dismembered for photographing after its initial discovery by Howard Carter. During this process, a rod had been inserted into the back of the skull to prop it up. The general conclusion of the researchers was that Tutankhamun had been a slightly built, but relatively healthy young man standing roughly 5 feet 6 inches tall. Using high-resolution photos of the CAT scans, 3 teams of forensic artists from France, Egypt, and the United States constructed separate but similar models of the king's face. The result not only bears a striking resemblance to the famous gold mask which covered the mummified face of Tutankhamun, but also to a well-known image of the pharaoh as a child where he was depicted as the sun god rising at dawn from a lotus blossom. But how did the king die? When examining Tutankhamun's body, the team found a fracture in the thigh bone of his left leg, previously assumed by Howard Carter to have been sustained during the embalming process or as a result of damage to the body after mummification. On re-examination, the scientists found that this badly broken leg had occurred only days before the death of Tutankhamun and had probably led to an attack of gangrene, which swiftly brought about the king's death. At present then, the evidence does not support a murderous conspiracy by Tutankhamun's close advisors and horemheb, but more likely a broken leg, perhaps sustained during a hunting accident, and not treated quickly enough to prevent infection. However, even with the best medical and Egyptological forensic work, it is doubtful that all aspects of Tutankhamun's health and possible causes for his death will ever be known due to the absence of the indispensable direct medical practitioner with patient interaction, and the limited amount of body tissue available for study. In other words, only the court physician might possibly have been in a position to tell us why Tutankhamun died. Thank you for watching.